The laughter echoed through the marble hall like tiny shards of glass cutting into my heart. It was supposed to be my 70th birthday, a moment of warmth, family, love. Instead, it felt like I was a stranger inside my own son's mansion. I stood there in the soft pink dress I had stitched myself years ago, the one that had survived decades, memories, and countless washes. I thought it looked nice, modest, appropriate for a quiet old woman. But when Melissa, my daughter-in-law, laid eyes on me, her lips curled into that familiar smirk I had learned to dread. "Oh, Mother," she drawled, her voice slicing through the chatter. "You didn't have to come in your thrift store special. We're not doing charity tonight." The room fell silent for a heartbeat, and then laughter, real laughter, from people I barely knew. From friends of my son who looked at me like I was an embarrassing relic. David tried to speak. "Melissa," but she waved him off, still smiling sweetly at the guests. "Relax, honey. I'm just joking. Your mom knows I love her style. Vintage, right?" My hands trembled as I tried to smile back. The music resumed, but everything inside me broke quietly. I could feel eyes on my dress, on me, like a cruel spotlight. I had raised a son to be kind. I had once been admired for my grace, my taste. And now, in this house filled with chandeliers and white lilies, I felt smaller than ever. No one noticed when I slipped out onto the balcony. The night air was cold. I told myself not to cry. Not here, not for this. But 70 years of restraint cracked all at once. My reflection in the glass door looked so tired, so out of place. I had given up my life's work to build this family. I had buried my name, my talent, my entire identity, all so that David could grow up safe. And now, I stood outside, mocked for the very simplicity that had once been my strength. Inside, I heard Melissa laughing again. That same cruel little laugh that always meant she had won. But she hadn't. Not tonight. Because in her arrogance, she hadn't noticed the one thing that would soon silence everyone in that room. The tiny stitched label inside my dress, carrying a name that once dazzled the fashion world. Emilia Rose, limited signature edition. The night went on, the way it always did. Too much champagne, too many forced smiles. I returned to my seat, pretending to enjoy the cake, while the whispers buzzed around me like flies. Melissa floated across the room in her gold gown, her laughter echoing over the music. Every now and then, her eyes flicked toward me, full of that polite pity reserved for someone beneath her. She thought she knew me. She thought she could measure my worth by the shine of my jewelry or the age of my dress. She had no idea. "Mother," she called sweetly, approaching with a glass of wine. "Let me take a picture of you for the family album. That dress deserves to be remembered." Her tone dripped with sarcasm, but I stood anyway. My son looked uncomfortable, yet said nothing. The flash went off, a cruel snapshot of humiliation disguised as affection. Then, as she leaned closer to fix my collar for the camera, something caught her eye. Her manicured fingers paused midair. The soft pink fabric shifted, and the small silk label peeked out near the seam. "What's this?" she murmured. Her expression changed. The smugness faded. She squinted, tracing the embroidered letters with a trembling nail. Silence rippled through the group. "Emilia? Rose?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Someone nearby gasped. Another person muttered, "That can't be real." I didn't move. I simply met her gaze, calm now, my heartbeat steady as stone. "Yes," I said softly. That was one of the first signature editions. I designed it myself. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Melissa's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. "You designed?" she stammered as the room fell silent. Even the music seemed to stop. People began whispering, connecting dots. Emilia Rose, the legendary fashion brand that had launched in New York 40 years ago. The one that had vanished from the spotlight when its mysterious founder disappeared. And there I was, standing in a dress she had just called cheap. Melissa looked as if she'd swallowed glass. I didn't know." "No," I said gently. "You didn't care to know." Her lips quivered, but no words came out. Around us, the laughter had vanished, replaced by stunned awe. David looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. I adjusted the hem of my dress, turned toward the guests, and smiled. "It's all right," I said softly. "Not everything valuable shines at first glance." And with that, I walked away, past the chandeliers, the whispers, and the daughter-in-law, who finally understood what true elegance meant. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Before I was the quiet old woman at the back of family photos, I was someone else. In the late 1980s, New York was my kingdom. I was a young designer with a tiny studio in Brooklyn and a heart full of impossible dreams. I spent my nights sketching until my fingers cramped, sleeping on bolts of fabric, chasing light through dusty windows to find the perfect shade of rose. My name, Evelyn Rose Martin, began to appear on whispers of runway reviews and glossy magazine pages. Back then, they called me the next big thing. Then I met James. He was tall, charming, a business journalist who believed in me before I did. We married quickly, as dreamers often do. When I launched my brand, he suggested naming it after my middle name, Emilia Rose. It sounded delicate, romantic, eternal. Within 5 years, Emilia Rose had become one of the most talked about independent fashion houses in New York. But success never comes alone. It always brings a price. James fell ill when our son David was barely 5. "Cancer," they said. I remember sitting beside his hospital bed as he whispered, "Promise me you'll raise him with love. Don't let ambition steal his childhood the way it stole ours." So I did the only thing that felt right. I let it all go. I sold my shares, hid my name, and walked away from Emilia Rose before anyone could question why. The company continued, rebranded under investors who kept the legend alive while erasing the woman who built it. My designs vanished, my label faded, but my son thrived. That was all that mattered then. We moved to the suburbs. I learned to live quietly. Sewing became my therapy. I stitched dresses for neighbors' daughters, not red carpets. I told David bedtime stories about stars and colors, not fame or fashion weeks. But sometimes, late at night, I'd unfold the last few sketches James had kept in his briefcase. The first designs that bore the Emilia Rose signature. I'd trace the lines and remember the way my heart used to race when I heard applause after a show. When David grew older, he wanted to study business, not art. I was proud, but a small part of me feared he'd forget who his mother had been. Not out of malice, but because I had erased her so completely. And when he brought home Melissa, elegant, confident, the kind of woman who never needed to earn her place in a room, I told myself it was fine. She made him happy. That was enough. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. When David married Melissa, I tried my best to welcome her with open arms. She was beautiful, polished, and spoke with that quiet confidence of someone who had never known struggle. Her parents were old-money socialites, the kind who hosted charity galas but never noticed the waiters serving them. From the very first dinner at their engagement party, I could sense the distance forming. When I complimented Melissa's pearl earrings, she smiled faintly and said, "Oh, these? They're from Cartier. I suppose you wouldn't know? They only made a limited batch." The words were innocent enough, but her tone, it was the kind that placed invisible walls between people. I stayed polite. I always stayed polite. When they bought the grand white house on Elmwood Drive, Melissa insisted on redecorating it completely. "We'll make it modern," she said. "Something fresh. No more of those old floral curtains you love, Mom." I nodded, even as the last remnants of my taste, the gentle colors, the lace, the warmth, were stripped away and replaced with marble and glass. David visited less after that. Business trips, meetings, dinners with investors. The same treadmill I had once escaped. Whenever he did come home, Melissa stood by his side like a gatekeeper. She'd smile, pour him wine, and talk over me. And he, tired and distracted, never noticed. I often sat by the window, sewing small dresses for my granddaughter, Lily. She was my light, the only one who still looked at me as if I mattered. "Grandma, your hands make magic," she'd say as I hemmed the little blue fabric for her birthday. She didn't know those same hands had once designed gowns that walked Paris runways. One afternoon, while I was mending one of David's shirts, Melissa came into the room. "Mother," she said lightly, "you really don't have to do that. We can afford to buy new ones." I smiled. "I know, dear. I just like fixing things." Her eyes flickered, not with understanding, but annoyance. "It's just, you make us look old-fashioned. We're not that kind of family anymore." That sentence burned deeper than she knew. Not that kind of family. I wanted to tell her about the years of struggle, about nights I went hungry so David could have milk, about the clients who laughed at me when I showed up in second-hand heels to sell my designs. But what would be the point? To her, history only mattered if it sparkled. So I stayed silent, stitching quietly, letting the needle and thread say what words could not. Every evening, I'd look at the city skyline through their enormous glass windows and whisper to myself, "You gave it all up for love. Don't regret it now." But as days turned into years and Melissa's condescension grew sharper, I began to wonder, had I sacrificed too much of myself? It was a rainy afternoon when I opened the old cedar box again, the one I kept hidden beneath my bed, wrapped in faded muslin and tied with a silk ribbon from another lifetime. The moment I lifted the lid, the familiar scent of cedar and old fabric filled the room. Inside lay the fragments of my past, a handful of sketches yellowed with age, a photograph of James smiling in his studio, and a folded letter with the words, "For David, when he's ready," written in my handwriting. I hadn't opened that box in years, not since David and Melissa had moved me into the guest suite at the back of their mansion, the one farthest from the noise of their parties. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it was clear that I had become a polite afterthought in their perfect world. Every few weeks, Melissa would knock softly on my door. "Mother, do you need anything?" she'd ask, glancing around the room as if checking whether it still matched her aesthetic. I always said no. She never stayed long, but that day, as rain traced crooked lines down the window, I needed to remember who I used to be, to remind myself that I was more than just someone's mother. I unfolded the sketches. There it was, the original design for the Rose Serenade gown, the one that had made Emilia Rose famous. A soft pink silk creation with a hand-stitched signature at the neckline. The same design I had later replicated for myself, the very dress Melissa would one day mock. I ran my fingers over the pencil lines, still crisp despite the years, and felt the ache of memory bloom in my chest. At the bottom of the box, beneath the fabrics, I found the legal envelope that I had almost forgotten. the deed of my hidden ownership. When I sold the company, the investors had insisted I keep a symbolic share. 10% of Emilia Rose, forever in my name. It wasn't much, but it was proof that my life's work hadn't vanished completely. I had never told David. He wouldn't have understood then. He had been too young, too eager to forget the poverty that shadowed his childhood. I tucked the envelope back, pressing the lid closed. The box had become my secret mirror, the only place I still saw the woman I once was. That evening, Lily came in, her tiny feet padding across the carpet. "Grandma," she whispered, "why do you smile when it rains?" I looked at her and said softly, "Because rain washes away the dust, sweetheart. It helps things grow again." She didn't understand, but she smiled anyway and climbed onto my lap. I kissed her hair and thought, maybe one day she'll know. I didn't realize then that the dress I was sewing for her mother's next party, stitched with the same pattern, the same secret label, would be the spark that reopened the past I had buried so carefully. After my 70th birthday, something in the air shifted, a quiet, bitter current beneath the polished calm of the house. Melissa avoided me more than usual, but not out of embarrassment. No, it was something else now. A cold awareness that she had misjudged me, and she didn't like what that said about her. The morning after the party, I found her in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up when I entered. "Coffee?" I asked softly. She finally raised her eyes, her smile tight. "I already had mine, but thanks." The silence stretched. I could almost hear the thoughts racing behind her perfect expression. How much does she really own? How much does she know? Later that week, I overheard her talking to David in the study. "I just think it's odd," she said, her voice measured but sharp. "How come you never knew your mother was a designer? A successful one at that? Doesn't that seem strange?" David sighed. "She probably didn't want to brag." "You know, Mom." "She hid her identity," Melissa countered. "And there's that label, Emilia Rose. That company's worth millions. What if she still has—" "Melissa!" David interrupted, his tone growing firm. "Drop it. My mother gave up everything for me. If she wanted us to know more, she would have told us." I wanted to cry when I heard him say that. I hadn't realized he still remembered the sacrifices, at least part of them. But Melissa's silence after that spoke volumes. She didn't drop it. Over the following days, I noticed small changes. My access to the house accounts was quietly removed. Something I hadn't even used in years, but now couldn't open. My sewing supplies were moved to the storage room without explanation. Even my place at the dining table shifted, ever so slightly, farther from the center, closer to the window. Subtle, calculated. Melissa began inviting her friends over for brunches, loud and glittering affairs filled with laughter and gossip. I was never asked to join, though I could hear every word from my room. One afternoon, I overheard a guest ask, "Is it true your mother-in-law used to design for Emilia Rose?" Melissa chuckled softly. "Oh, she tells sweet stories. I'm sure she believes them. Age does that, you know." That night, I sat in my room, hands trembling as I tried to thread a needle. The silence around me felt heavier than ever. I had thought the truth would bring peace. Instead, it had awakened something ugly: envy, resentment, and fear. I realized then that Melissa wasn't just embarrassed by me anymore. She was threatened. And when someone like her feels threatened, she doesn't retreat. She attacks, quietly, strategically, and always with a smile. It began with small humiliations, little gestures that could be mistaken for carelessness if you weren't paying attention. My favorite teacup disappeared from the kitchen shelf. The framed photo of me and David when he was 5 quietly vanished from the hallway wall. Even the dress, had been taken from my closet. When I asked Melissa about it, she smiled sweetly, too sweetly. "Oh, that old thing? I sent it to the cleaners for you. It looked delicate." I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone felt off, polished, rehearsed. Days passed, then weeks. The dress never came back. Melissa, meanwhile, became strangely attentive, asking questions that seemed innocent on the surface. "Mother, how did you learn to sew so well? You said you sold your company, right? Did you ever get paid for it? Do you still talk to anyone from, what was it called, Emilia Rose?" Each question chipped away at my patience. She wasn't curious, she was digging. One afternoon, I found her in my room, standing near my dresser with the cedar box open. My heart stopped. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't flinch. "Oh, I was just looking for Lily's missing hairpin. You don't mind, do you?" But my sketches were in her hands. She looked at them as if she'd unearthed a treasure, or a weapon. "Such beautiful designs," she said softly. "Did you draw all these?" "Yes," I replied. She tilted her head, smiling. "Funny. They look exactly like the pieces in Emilia Rose's anniversary collection next month." That was when I knew she wasn't just curious, she was planning something. I closed the box, my hands firm this time. "Melissa," I said, meeting her eyes, "there are things about that company you don't understand, and I suggest you leave it that way." Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes hardened. "Of course, Mother," she said. "You rest. You've done enough, in every sense." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way she said it. "You've done enough." Like a final line in a conversation I didn't know had already ended. I began to suspect she wanted to erase me the way the investors once had. Quietly, thoroughly, efficiently. And the cruelest part? I couldn't even warn David. He wouldn't believe me. To him, Melissa was everything I wasn't. Young, confident, sophisticated. To him, I was just his aging mother, grateful to be part of his glittering life. But beneath that glitter, something darker was growing, a secret neither of them could control once it came to light. And it was only a matter of time before it did. A few weeks later, a thin, white envelope arrived in the mail. Elegant, embossed and addressed to me. At first, I thought it was another catalog or charity appeal. But when I opened it, my breath caught. Emilia Rose, 40th Anniversary Celebration Gala. The letter was formal, but the words shimmered with something personal. "We are honoring the anonymous founder who built the foundation of Emilia Rose. We would be honored if Mrs. Evelyn Martin could attend." My hands trembled. After 4 decades, they had finally remembered me. Or perhaps the right people had finally learned the truth. I sat in silence for a long time, the letter resting in my lap. My heart swelled with both pride and fear. Part of me wanted to go, to stand on that stage and reclaim what I had once given up. But another part whispered, "If Melissa finds out, she'll use it against you." That whisper proved right. Later that evening, while setting the dinner table, Melissa noticed the envelope tucked between my books. "What's that?" she asked casually. "Oh, nothing important," I said too quickly. Of course, she didn't believe me. That night, I caught her rifling through my desk drawer again. She wasn't even subtle this time. When I confronted her, she held up the invitation with that infuriatingly calm smile. "So," she said, "you're going to a gala for a brand you used to work for?" I built that brand, I said quietly. She laughed softly. Sure you did, Mother. Her words stung, not because of disbelief, but because of the contempt underneath. But her curiosity had turned into something more dangerous now. Greed. A few days later, I overheard a conversation between her and a man I didn't recognize, a slick voice on speakerphone. If your mother-in-law's story is real, the man said, there's value there. Historical rights, royalties, branding. Find out what she still owns. My blood turned to ice. Melissa's response was smooth. Don't worry, I'll get everything she has, if there's anything left. That night, I locked my cedar box and hid it beneath the floorboard, praying she wouldn't find it again. For the first time in years, I considered leaving, packing my things, and disappearing quietly before the storm hit. But then, I looked at Lily, asleep with her little stuffed bear, and I couldn't. I wouldn't let my granddaughter grow up thinking cruelty was power. If Melissa wanted to dig up the past, then she would find more than she bargained for. Because the truth she was chasing wasn't just about fashion or money. It was about betrayal, sacrifice, and the price of forgetting who you are. And as the day of the gala drew near, I realized the stage was set for a reckoning neither of us could avoid. The night of the gala arrived like a ghost from another lifetime. Velvet, glittering, full of faces I once knew and others who would never recognize me. The invitation said formal black tie, but I didn't have the heart to buy anything new. Instead, I wore what had become my quiet armor, the same soft pink dress Melissa had once mocked. I'd mended its seams, polished the little pearl buttons, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. When I descended the stairs, Melissa's eyes widened. You're wearing that? She asked, unable to hide her disgust. Yes, I said simply. It seems fitting. David looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. He was used to the tension between us now, used to pretending it wasn't there. The ride to the hotel was silent. Outside, New York shimmered under a light drizzle, neon reflections rippling across the black streets. Inside the car, the air was heavy with unspoken words. The ballroom at the Astoria Grand was breathtaking. Chandeliers, golden drapes, and the soft hum of expensive perfume mingling with ambition. Cameras flashed as models, investors, and designers mingled, laughing behind flutes of champagne. On a large digital banner above the stage were the words, Emilia Rose, celebrating 40 years of elegance. My throat tightened. My name, my legacy. Melissa stayed close, watching every move I made. Remember, she whispered, we're guests tonight, not relics. Her words didn't sting this time. I had no energy left to hate her. When the lights dimmed, the host, a poised woman in her 40s, took the stage. Her voice was smooth, practiced. Tonight, she announced, we honor not only the success of Emilia Rose, but the mysterious woman who built its foundation, a woman whose identity has remained hidden. Until now. The audience murmured. Melissa turned sharply toward me. The host smiled. Please welcome to the stage, Mrs. Evelyn Martin. For a moment, I couldn't move. The applause rose like a wave. Genuine, thunderous. I felt my knees weaken as I stood, clutching the table for balance. Melissa's face went pale. What is this? She whispered. I stepped forward, my heart beating so loud I could hear it over the music. The lights blinded me as I climbed the stage. And there, on the giant screen behind me, appeared an image, a young woman standing in front of her first boutique, Emilia Rose. Her smile proud, her hands covered in chalk dust. Me. The room fell utterly silent. The host turned toward me, eyes shining. Mrs. Martin, would you like to say a few words? I took the microphone with trembling hands. I don't know if I deserve this, I began softly. I was never looking for fame. I only ever wanted to create beauty, something that could make people feel seen. And then I glanced toward my son and daughter-in-law. Melissa frozen in disbelief, David's eyes glistening with tears. But somewhere along the way, I said, voice steady now, I learned that the most beautiful things are often born out of sacrifice. The audience erupted into applause. Cameras flashed, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't invisible. The applause seemed to stretch endlessly, rolling through the ballroom like a wave of release. For me, for the years of silence I'd endured. I could see faces in the crowd, people I once worked with, journalists who'd written about Amelia Rose, even models from my early collections. They were all clapping, standing, some with tears in their eyes. When I finally stepped down from the stage, my hands were still trembling. I wasn't used to being seen anymore. Every step felt unreal. David was the first to reach me. His voice cracked as he said, Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? I smiled faintly, brushing his cheek with my thumb. Because I didn't want you to grow up chasing applause. I wanted you to chase meaning. He lowered his gaze, ashamed and proud all at once. You gave up everything for me. I gave up everything for love, I corrected softly. Before I could say more, Melissa stepped forward. Her face was a mask, elegant, practiced, but her hands betrayed her. They were trembling. That was impressive, she said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't realize you'd really been part of the company. I looked at her. I wasn't part of it, dear. I was it. The words landed like a quiet thunderclap between us. Around us, guests were whispering. Some congratulated me, others snapped photos. Melissa smiled through clenched teeth, clutching David's arm. We should sit, she muttered. But she couldn't hide the storm behind her perfect posture. Later that night, during the reception, a representative from the company approached me. Mrs. Martin, he said, it's an honor. We'd love to formally restore your name to the Amelia Rose archives. Perhaps even discuss a limited revival collection. The Founder's Line. My heart swelled, but before I could answer, Melissa cut in, her tone honeyed but sharp. That's wonderful, but I think Mom's had a long night. She's not as young as she used to be, you know? The man looked awkward. I smiled politely. I may be old, I said. But I'm not done yet. He grinned. I didn't think you were. When he walked away, Melissa leaned close to me, her whisper icy. You could have told us. You let me humiliate myself in front of everyone. I turned to her, meeting her gaze evenly. No, Melissa, you humiliated yourself. I never asked for your cruelty. Her jaw tightened. You've made me look like a fool. Perhaps, I said, my voice calm. You'll learn what kindness looks like after being on the other side of it. For a moment, her mask cracked. Anger, shame, fear flickered all at once. Then she turned and walked away, her heels echoing sharply on the marble floor. I stood alone again amid the laughter and applause, realizing that vindication doesn't always feel sweet. Sometimes it just feels heavy. The night should have ended there, wrapped neatly in poetic justice, but life, as I've learned, never stops at the first ending. Because when secrets begin to surface, they pull others up with them, and the next truth waiting beneath mine would be far darker. The gala ended close to midnight, but sleep never came to me. I sat by the window in my small guest suite at the mansion, the city lights flickering far away. and the sound of the rain whispering against the glass. For the first time in 40 years, my name was spoken again. Not as a rumor, not as a forgotten footnote, but as a truth. And yet, it didn't bring peace. I could feel the tension brewing the moment we returned home. Melissa didn't say a word during the drive. Her silence was sharp, brittle, and louder than any argument could be. David tried to speak once. "Melissa, let's just be happy for her." But she cut him off with a single look. When we stepped inside, she went straight to her study and slammed the door. I heard the lock click. The next morning, I caught a glimpse of her laptop screen as I passed the room. Open to a business database, searching Amelia Rose Holdings, corporate records, founding shares. My heart sank. Melissa wasn't the type to let anything go. I'd seen that glint in her eyes before. The same one that appeared whenever she smelled power. That afternoon, David found me in the garden, pruning the roses I'd planted years ago. He sat beside me, quiet for a while, before speaking. "She's having a hard time processing everything," he said carefully. "Processing or plotting?" I asked, without looking up. He sighed. "Mom." "I know her, David," I said gently. "She's not angry because I hid my past. She's angry because she didn't control the discovery." He looked away, guilt flickering in his eyes. "She's just afraid of losing face, of people seeing her differently." "She should be," I murmured. "Because people will." That evening, a letter arrived, one I hadn't expected. It was from Arthur Green, the attorney who had handled the original sale of Amelia Rose 4 decades ago. The letter was brief, but heavy with implication. "Mrs. Martin, due to the renewed public attention regarding your connection to the company, certain documents related to your retained shares have been reactivated for review. You may wish to confirm your ownership with our office immediately." Ownership. The word glowed like a buried ember in my chest. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket, unsure whether to feel gratitude or dread. That night, while everyone slept, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I opened my door just enough to see Melissa, barefoot, slipping into the study with a flashlight. I watched her for a long moment before whispering to the darkness, "Be careful, Melissa. Some truths don't like being dug up." She didn't hear me, of course. She was already too deep in her own greed to turn back. And as I closed my door, a strange calm washed over me. The kind that comes before a storm. Because I knew the next revelation wouldn't just change how she saw me. It would change everything she thought she owned. It happened 3 days later. The morning light filtered through the living room windows as I sat quietly, sipping my tea, pretending not to notice the tension brewing upstairs. The house felt unnaturally still, the kind of silence that comes before something shatters. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Melissa descended the staircase, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her face pale and drawn. She didn't speak at first. She simply stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. Or perhaps as though she finally believed what she had refused to see. David followed moments later, confusion etched across his face. "What's going on?" Melissa turned to him, voice shaking but cold. "Did you know your mother still owns part of Amelia Rose?" The teacup trembled slightly in my hand, but I didn't answer. David blinked. "What are you talking about?" "She's a shareholder, David," Melissa said, raising her voice now. "A significant one, 10% of the company. Do you have any idea how much that's worth? Millions, and she never told us." He turned to me, eyes wide. "Mom, is that true?" I set the teacup down gently, letting the moment breathe before I spoke. "Yes," I said quietly. I never sold all of it. They insisted I keep a share. It was symbolic then. I didn't think it mattered anymore. Melissa laughed. Bitter, sharp, cruel. Didn't think it mattered? You've been sitting on a fortune while we… She stopped herself, realizing how selfish it sounded. But the words hung there anyway. David's voice softened. Mom, why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't want you to measure me by money, I said simply. And I didn't want her… My eyes flicked toward Melissa. To see me as competition. Melissa's face twisted. Competition? Don't flatter yourself. I smiled faintly. Oh, my dear. I don't have to. You already do that for me. The room went silent. For the first time, David's expression hardened as he looked at his wife. Melissa, enough. She turned on him, desperate now. You don't understand. This changes everything. If her ownership gets public recognition, she'll have influence, control. Control over what? He snapped. She's my mother, not your rival. Melissa's eyes shimmered with fury and humiliation. You've always chosen her over me, she hissed, even when she was nothing. Stop! David's voice cracked through the air like lightning. She was never nothing. You just never looked close enough to see who she is. Melissa froze, her lips parting, but no sound came out. She turned toward me, not with anger now, but with something more dangerous. Fear. I'm not your enemy, Melissa, I said softly. But I won't apologize for existing. Her eyes glistened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something human, the fragile girl beneath the diamond armor. Then she turned away, leaving the room in silence, the echo of her heels fading up the stairs. David sank beside me, shaking his head. Mom, he whispered, I'm so sorry. I placed a hand over his. Don't be. The truth always stings before it heals. Outside, the sky darkened, thunder rumbling in the distance. And I knew this was only the first storm. The next week unfolded like a quiet war. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just a heavy tension that filled every room like smoke. Melissa avoided me, though I could feel her watching from the corners of her perfectly curated life. David tried to keep peace, but even he seemed worn thin, caught between loyalty and love. I thought the storm had passed. I wanted to believe that, at least. Until one afternoon, the doorbell rang. A man in a tailored gray suit stood there, briefcase in hand. Mrs. Martin? He asked politely. Yes, I replied. He smiled, professional but uneasy. I'm from Evers & Cole Legal. I'm here on behalf of your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Melissa Martin. She's requested an authorization regarding the transfer of certain shares in Amelia Rose Holdings. For a moment, I didn't understand. Transfer? He hesitated. Yes, ma'am. She intends to sell a combined ownership block totaling 15%, your 10 and her 5. The room tilted. My pulse thundered in my ears. I never gave consent, I said firmly. He frowned. That's precisely why I'm here. She's provided partial documentation, but it lacks your signature. We thought it best to confirm. Partial documentation. My heart sank. She'd found my old papers. Thank you for coming, I said, voice steady, though my hands shook. Please tell Mrs. Martin I'll be handling this personally. He nodded, relieved, and left. When the door closed, I leaned against it, breathless. Rage and heartbreak collided inside me. She hadn't just disrespected me. She'd tried to erase me again, just as the investors had done all those years ago. That evening, I waited for her in the dining room. When she entered, her usual grace faltered at the sight of me sitting there, the letter from her lawyer on the table between us. Melissa, I said quietly, You've been busy. She didn't deny it. You weren't using it, she snapped. You don't even care about the company anymore. It's just paper. Money sitting in a drawer while the world moves on. Paper? I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. That paper is the reason you have this house, these parties, this life. I built it with my hands when I had nothing but a dream and a sewing needle. She flinched, but quickly hardened again. You don't understand business, Evelyn. You're old. You think sentiment is value? I'm trying to protect what's ours. Ours? I asked, standing slowly. Or yours? Her jaw clenched. I stepped closer. You tried to sell something that never belonged to you. Did you think I wouldn't find out? For a moment, her mask slipped. Panic flashed in her eyes. Then she smirked, desperate and cruel. You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare expose me. David would. David already knows. I interrupted softly. Her eyes widened. I picked up the phone from the table and pressed play. From the speaker came the lawyer's recorded message, every word clear. She went pale. You recorded? Yes, I said, voice calm now. I learned from the best manipulators. You. For once, she couldn't find a smile to hide behind. The next morning, the air inside the house felt thick enough to choke on. Melissa hadn't slept. I could tell by the faint shadows under her eyes, her trembling hands as she poured coffee. She wouldn't drink. David came down the stairs moments later, still in his robe, rubbing his eyes. Mom called for a family meeting. I heard Melissa mutter under her breath, sarcasm clinging to every word. How dramatic. I ignored her tone. David, I said evenly, we need to talk about something important, and I'd prefer we do it now. He frowned. Is this about the company again? Yes, I said, and about trust. Melissa's eyes darted toward me, then away. Her voice came out tight. This is unnecessary, Evelyn. You're making a scene. No, I interrupted, calm but sharp. You did that when you tried to sell what wasn't yours? David froze. What? I turned to him. Your wife attempted to transfer my shares in Amelia Rose Holdings to a private buyer, without my permission. His face went pale. That's not possible. He turned to Melissa, voice breaking. Tell me that's not true. Melissa's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at me, then at him, trapped between lies and consequences. Finally, she whispered, I was only trying to protect our future. You don't understand, David. He cut her off. You forged her papers? You tried to sell her company? She abandoned it, Melissa snapped, her composure crumbling. She gave it up decades ago. Why should she keep control of something she doesn't even care about? I looked at her quietly. Melissa, I gave it up to raise him. I never stopped caring. I just stopped needing the world to see it. Her breath hitched. David stared at her in disbelief. You had no right. She's manipulating you, Melissa hissed, desperation slipping through her polished mask. You've always been blind when it comes to her. David's tone hardened, the way James's used to when he'd reached the end of patience. Enough. I reached into my folder and pulled out a single envelope. Old, creased, sealed with the same ink from 40 years ago. This, I said softly, is my original contract. When I sold my shares, I kept 10%, irrevocably, permanently mine, but there's something you don't know. Melissa's eyes flickered with something like dread. I handed the papers to David. He opened them, scanning the faded text. Then he stopped, eyes wide. Mom? His voice trembled. It says, transferable by inheritance? I nodded. Yes, to my son, not my daughter-in-law. Melissa's breath caught. No, she whispered. That can't. David turned the final page, reading aloud the handwritten addendum. To my son, David Martin, with love. May he always remember that what is built with love should never be sold for greed. Melissa staggered back as if struck. Her voice broke. You wrote that for him? All this time? I met her gaze and said softly, yes, because I knew one day someone like you would try to take it away. For a moment, the world was utterly still, just the three of us, standing amid decades of love, betrayal, and truth finally laid bare. Then David folded the papers, his hands shaking. This ends now. David stood there for a long moment, his face drained of color, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. The morning light cut through the windows, landing between us, him in the middle, me on one side, Melissa on the other. A line of light dividing truth from deceit. He finally exhaled, voice trembling. I need to make a call. Melissa stepped forward, panic flashing in her eyes. David, wait, please. You don't understand how this looks. No, he said firmly, his tone cold, foreign. I understand exactly how it looks. He dialed quickly, his hand shaking just slightly. Mr. Green? Yes, this is David Martin. I'd like to confirm the validity of my mother's original contract with Amelia Rose Holdings. He paused, listening. Yes, we have the documents right here. Melissa's breathing grew shallow. She reached out for him, but he took a step back. Don't, he said. Within an hour, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Arthur Green, the elderly lawyer who'd once handled my sale of the company, stepped out with his briefcase and that same calm, steady expression that used to comfort me decades ago. When he entered, he nodded politely to me. Mrs. Martin, it's been a long time. I smiled faintly. Too long, Arthur. He turned to David. I've reviewed the situation. Your mother's 10% is still legally hers. The ownership transfer clause is indeed real and binding. It can only pass to a direct blood heir. Not a spouse. Melissa blanched. That's absurd. Laws change, contracts expire. Arthur adjusted his glasses, unbothered. Not this one, Mrs. Martin. This document was written under perpetual shareholder protection. It cannot be voided or reassigned without Mrs. Evelyn's explicit notarized consent, and judging by what I've seen, she's given none. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed again. Her words failed her for once. David looked at her, disappointment clouding his face. You lied to me. I was trying to help us, she cried, desperation cracking through the calm she'd always worn like armor. You think she would have just given it to you? She was keeping it, hiding it. I wanted to make sure it stayed in the family. It is staying in the family, David said quietly, just not the way you want it. She looked between us, trembling. You both think I'm the villain here, but what about me? I've worked for this family, kept it afloat, kept appearances while she sat there sewing. Her voice broke into a sob that sounded almost real. You both make me feel like I'm never enough. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Then I said gently, Melissa, you were enough when you were kind, but you traded kindness for ambition, and that's a bargain no one wins. She sank into a chair, silent, her shoulders shaking. Arthur cleared his throat softly. Mrs. Martin, he said to me, if you wish, we can make your ownership official again in the corporate registry. Publicly. I looked at Melissa, the woman who had mocked my cheap dress, now broken by her own greed. Yes, I said. Let the world remember who built Amelia Rose. Arthur's words lingered in the air like the final note of a symphony. Melissa sat motionless, her mascara smudged, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe through humiliation. David rubbed his temples as though the weight of it all was pressing down on him at once. His wife's deceit, his mother's silence, the truth finally too loud to ignore. But for me, it was strange. I didn't feel triumph, only clarity. "Arthur," I said softly, "there's one more document I need you to see." Melissa looked up sharply. "What now?" I reached into my folder and pulled out a single sealed envelope, the paper thick, the handwriting delicate. James's handwriting. The moment I laid it on the table, David froze. "I found this in the cedar box a few weeks ago," I said. "Your father wrote it before he passed. I never opened it until yesterday." David's hands trembled as he broke the seal and began to read aloud. "To my Evelyn and our son, David. If you are reading this, it means time has taken me where you cannot yet follow. Evelyn, I know you'll give up everything for our boy, but promise me you'll leave a piece of yourself behind. Something that belongs only to you, and one day, to our granddaughter." David's voice cracked. He mentioned Lily." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "He always knew." Melissa's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said quietly, "that long before you came into this family, I arranged something James would have been proud of." Arthur looked at me with recognition dawning. "You made a transfer." I smiled faintly. "Yes." "The 10% of Amelia Rose no longer belongs to me. It belongs to Lily." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Melissa finally rose to her feet, voice trembling with disbelief. You gave it to a child?" "To a child," I said gently, "who still knows how to love without conditions." "You can't do that," she snapped. "She's a minor. She doesn't even understand what that means." Arthur interjected calmly. "Actually, Mrs. Martin can. The shares are held in trust under Mrs. Evelyn's guardianship until Lily turns 21. It's perfectly legal." Melissa's face turned ashen. "You're punishing me," she whispered. "You're using her to punish me." I shook my head slowly. "No, Melissa. I'm protecting her. From you. From greed. From the kind of emptiness that makes a woman mock another for her dress." David stood behind me then, his voice low but certain. "Mom's right. Lily deserves to inherit something that isn't poisoned by pride." Melissa's shoulders slumped. She looked utterly lost, a woman stripped of every illusion. "Do you know what hurts most?" I said softly. "You could have had it all, Melissa. The company, the family, even my trust. But you wanted control instead of connection. And that's what cost you everything." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. For once, there was no fight left in her. Arthur quietly gathered the documents. "I'll see that everything is filed," he said, giving me a small nod of respect. As he left, the house fell into silence. David put his hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Mom." I smiled faintly. "No, son. I just did what should have been done a long time ago." Outside, the rain began again, soft, cleansing, like the closing curtain after a long, painful play. The days that followed felt quiet, almost too quiet. Melissa stopped speaking to me entirely. She moved through the house like a shadow, her footsteps light, her face unreadable. The only sound she made was the click of the front door closing each morning as she left for errands that lasted hours. I didn't ask where she went. Some wounds need space to breathe before they can heal or scar. David tried to keep the family from unraveling, but silence is heavier than anger. We ate dinners that tasted of tension, spoke words that echoed into nothing. The house, once too large for me, suddenly felt like a cage for all of us. One evening, I found him sitting alone on the porch, staring into the dark yard. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't know what to do with her anymore. She's broken, or maybe she always was, and I didn't see it." I sat beside him, folding my hands on my lap. "She's hurting, David. She's lost the image she built of herself, and that's a painful thing to lose." He looked at me, eyes tired. "And what about you? Don't you hate her? After everything?" I shook my head slowly. "Hate is heavy, son. I've carried enough in my life. I won't carry that too." He let out a shaky breath. "You always forgive people who don't deserve it." "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe forgiveness isn't for them at all." The crickets filled the silence that followed. Somewhere inside, I heard Lily's small laugh, the sound that still made this house feel alive. The next morning, I walked her to school. She skipped beside me, holding my hand tightly. "Grandma," she said suddenly, "Mommy's sad. Did she do something bad?" I paused. How do you explain betrayal to a child whose world is still painted in innocence? "She made a mistake," I said finally. "Sometimes grown-ups do that when they forget what really matters." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Then maybe you can make her cookies. Cookies fix everything." I smiled through the ache in my chest. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe they do." That afternoon, I returned home to an emptier house. Melissa's things were gone. Her perfumes, her shoes, even the family portrait from the hallway. On the kitchen counter, a single note rested beneath her wedding ring. "I need time. Don't look for me." David found it that evening. He said nothing, just sat down, holding the ring in his palm. There were no tears, just a quiet acceptance, as if a long chapter had finally ended. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me and whispered, "Is Mommy coming back?" I brushed the hair from her face. "Maybe someday," I said softly. "But until then, we'll be okay." When she fell asleep, I went to my room, opened the cedar box one last time, and placed the company papers inside. The label Emilia Rose caught the lamplight, a name that had survived time, loss, and pride. I realized then that my legacy wasn't the company, or the wealth, or the fame that could have been. It was the love that had endured, fragile, stubborn, real. I closed the box and exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because I had won, but because I had let go. Months passed. The seasons shifted quietly, each one leaving its faint fingerprint on the house. The roses in the garden bloomed early that spring, soft pink, heavy with scent. And every morning I found myself tending them the way I once tended my dreams. I had moved into a smaller cottage on the edge of town, trading marble floors and chandeliers for sunlight and birdsong. It was enough. Lily came every weekend. She loved the little sewing room I'd set up near the window, with spools of thread like candy-colored constellations. "Teach me, Grandma," she'd beg, eyes wide. "Teach me how to make things pretty." So I did. I taught her how to hold a needle gently, how to listen to the rhythm of the thread. "Sewing," I told her, "isn't about perfection. It's about patience. You pull too fast, and you tear what you're trying to fix." She nodded solemnly, repeating the words as if they were gospel. I smiled. Children understand truth far better than adults sometimes. On quiet evenings, David would stop by after work. He never talked much about Melissa, and I never asked. But sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I'd see him glancing at Lily, the same way his father once looked at me. with that silent promise of never letting history repeat itself. I found joy again in small things: baking bread, reading old design journals, teaching sewing at the local community center. The women there reminded me of who I once was, full of hope, full of stories stitched into their clothes. But peace has a way of being interrupted. One afternoon, while sorting through fabric scraps, I heard the postman's knock. A plain white envelope waited on the porch. My name written in delicate cursive I recognized instantly. Melissa. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, afraid of what it might reopen. Then I sat by the window and unfolded it. Evelyn, you were right. I lost myself somewhere along the way. I wanted to be admired so badly that I forgot how to be loved. I've been seeing a counselor. I'm staying with my sister for now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say, thank you for saving Lily from becoming me. A single tear landed on the paper. If it's all right, maybe someday I could visit. I'd like her to see that I'm trying to learn what grace really looks like. Melissa. I folded the letter carefully, as though it might break. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the garden in gold. Lily ran through the roses, her laughter rising like a song. And I thought, maybe this was how healing sounded. Not loud, not grand, just soft footsteps returning home. I didn't know if Melissa would ever truly change, or if we'd ever share a real conversation again. But I knew this. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about releasing the weight that once kept you from breathing. That night, I tucked her letter into the cedar box, next to the old sketches, the deed, and James's note, and whispered to the past, "It's time." Then I turned off the lamp, letting the house fall into a gentle silence, the kind that finally felt like peace. 2 years later, the world looked softer somehow, or maybe it was just me who'd changed. I had learned to wake up without pain in my chest, to drink my morning tea without waiting for an apology that might never come. Peace, I realized, wasn't a gift from others. It was something you sewed together, stitch by patient stitch, out of the scraps life left you. The cottage had become a little haven, roses blooming at the porch, sunlight spilling through lace curtains, laughter echoing on weekends when Lily visited. She was growing fast now, taller, bolder, her hands steady as she learned to sew small dresses for her dolls. One Saturday morning, she sat beside me at the table, threading a needle with fierce concentration. "Grandma," she said suddenly, "Mommy wrote me a letter." I looked up, my hands pausing mid-stitch. "She did?" She nodded. "She said she's sorry. She said she's getting better." I smiled softly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." "She wants to see us," Lily added quietly. "Can she come?" For a moment, old wounds stirred. The memory of laughter turned cruel, of betrayal disguised as charm. But then I looked at Lily's hopeful eyes, wide and full of innocence, and I knew what James would have said if he were here. Don't let bitterness raise your child. "Yes," I said finally, my voice steady. "She can come." That afternoon, when the knock came at the door, I hesitated before opening it. Melissa stood there, thinner, older somehow, her once perfect hair tied back simply, her clothes modest. But it wasn't her appearance that struck me. It was her eyes. They were softer now, stripped of pride. "Hello, Evelyn," she said quietly. "You look well." I nodded. "So do you." She stepped inside, her gaze wandering across the little room, over the spools of thread and sketches scattered on the table. "You still design?" she murmured. "Always," I said with a small smile. "Creation is how I breathe." Lily ran in from the garden and threw her arms around her mother's waist. "Mommy!" Melissa knelt, hugging her tightly, tears catching in her throat. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "I missed you so much." For a moment, I looked away. Not out of discomfort, but because I wanted to give them that small, sacred privacy. When Melissa rose, she turned to me. "I don't deserve to ask for forgiveness," she said softly. "But I'd like to earn it, if you'll let me." I studied her face, searching for pretense, but there was none. Just sincerity, trembling, and raw. "You don't have to earn forgiveness," I said. "You only have to live like someone who understands it." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. We spent that afternoon together, the three of us, in the little sewing room. Melissa helped Lily cut patterns, her hands unsure at first, but growing steadier with each fold. When the sun dipped low, casting gold across the table, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in years. Peace. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Before she left, Melissa turned to me. "You know," she said, her voice breaking into a small laugh, "I used to think elegance came from how expensive something was. Now I see, it comes from how much love goes into it." I smiled faintly. "You've learned the most important lesson of all." When the door closed behind her, the room stayed warm, as if forgiveness itself had left a bit of light behind. Summer came early that year. The garden overflowed with roses again, their petals soft as silk, their scent drifting lazily through the cottage windows. I spent most mornings on the porch, sketching quietly while Lily played on the grass. She was 12 now, taller, curious, full of the kind of confidence that still had kindness at its core. One morning, she came running up to me with a bright idea in her eyes. "Grandma," she said breathlessly, "our school is hosting an art fair. I want to make something special, like your dresses." I smiled. "Then you should," she grinned. "But I want it to mean something, like a story." So we worked together for weeks. I taught her how to blend fabric colors, how to feel the difference between satin and cotton, how to let her heart guide her hands. The design she chose was a small pink dress, simple yet alive with detail. On the inside of the collar, she stitched a name in tiny cursive letters. "Emilia Lily." When I saw it, I couldn't help but laugh through the tears that blurred my eyes. "You found your own way to continue the line," I whispered. "It's not just a name," she said proudly. "It's a promise." That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone at my work table, looking at the old sketches. The same ones I'd drawn when the world still knew me as Evelyn Rose Martin, designer, dreamer, fighter. I realized that what I'd left behind wasn't fashion or fame. It was courage. The courage to create, to forgive, to start again, no matter how broken the past had been. The following weekend, Melissa came to see Lily's dress. She looked nervous, standing at the doorway like a guest instead of family. But when Lily proudly showed her the tiny embroidered label, something inside Melissa broke open. She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "She used my name," Melissa whispered. "She used ours," I corrected softly. "You're part of this story too, whether you believe it or not." Melissa turned to me then, and in her eyes, for the first time, I saw peace. Not perfection, not guilt, just quiet acceptance. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked gently. "For not giving up on me." The sunlight streamed through the open window, landing on all three of our hands. Mine, hers, and Lily's. 3 generations stitched together by something stronger than pride. Understanding. That evening, after they left, I walked through the garden one last time, barefoot among the petals. The wind carried the scent of roses, the same scent that had followed me all my life, from my studio in New York to this quiet little cottage. I looked toward the horizon, where the sun dipped low and golden, and whispered, "James, I kept my promise. I left a piece of myself behind." Then I smiled, because I knew that even when I was gone, the name Emilia Rose would live on. Not in stores or magazines, but in the heart of a little girl who believed beauty could heal the world. And maybe, in the end, that was all I'd ever wanted. If this story touched your heart, type 1 below. If not, type 0. Your simple comment helps us know if you'd like more stories like this. Stories of love, loss, and second chances.